Okay, welcome to Black Man Speak. I'm your co-host J.R. Stewart.
And I'm your co-host, Tommy Duncan. You can call me TD. It is
TD.
Wednesday night, Jimmy.
So,
Absolutely. It is Wednesday night, Jimmy. And I won't say what I'm accustomed to saying,
go
but
ahead.
it's Wednesday night, and that means it's Black Men
That's
Speak.
right. It's Black Men Speak. Once again, people, uh, we produce this show and we bring it to you for one purpose only, Tom, to uplift the intelligence of our people so we can come together and get up out of this hole that we find ourselves in. We have a very special guest, but before we get to Brother Robert, I want to say a big shout out to Liquid for providing our theme music, to Forest Films and Us Studio for producing our show. And we do have another sponsor from sendmymessage.com in the form of a commercial, which we'll play later on. So let's get started, Tom. We got in the. Before we get started, one other thing, we need everyone to, if you hadn't hit the notification button, please do that now. Please subscribe to our show and please share and spread the word. You don't have to do those things necessarily in that order, but you need to get all three of them done. And also, we need everyone who's watching the show, please bring a guest with you. You guys will notice that we've changed our time to 8 o'clock to make it a little more convenient for the East Coast. And so, with that being said, Tom, all of the business out of the way, let's get started.
Absolutely. So we've got a lot of stuff going on in the news today, as always, Jimmy. And what we do is we provide an alternative platform for folks to get information regarding things that are going on in our community in particular. And quite frankly, Jimmy, we're long overdue and looking at the issues that really matter.
Right.
As you mentioned a little bit earlier, we want to have the most well-informed audience out in the community. So regardless of whether you're in the East Coast, West Coast, in the South, in Texas, Detroit, wherever you are, you have the information that you need to have the right conversations. And so, one of the things, Jimmy, when we were talking a little bit earlier this week before the show, we knew we had to address what was going on in the border area of Del Rio, right in Mexico at the Texas-Mexico border. And we began to talk about what was going on with the Haitians who have been coming from Colombia, Brazil, and other places trying to seek asylum in the United States. But then we began to talk about how starkly different the policy seems to
Very
be
different,
with the
Tom.
U.S. government when it pertains to these Haitians, which has a historical narrative on it that precedes obviously what's going on right now. We will have our special guest and historian to introduce himself very briefly. But when we look at what's going on now, we look at what's just happened in the last month or so, where you have the president of Haiti who was just literally
Assassinated.
assassinated in his own home, in bed, next to his wife. He was assassinated. You look at, of course, the major physical trauma that the country has gone through
Right.
within the last month as well in mid-August. And then also, it seems like every year, if not every couple of years, there are major hurricanes that are literally destabilizing the country. But I mean, if you blink and think back a couple of years, Jimmy, it was just 2010 where they had another major storm that came in and pretty much destabilized the country. We've talked about this before, Jimmy, where the U.S. had so-called committed, billions of dollars to help support
$32 billion
Haiti.
dollars was raised, Tom, given
Absolutely.
to the Clinton and Bush. And the Haitians today, if you go to Haiti right now and ask them where that money went, you can't find two Haitians that can tell you what the money was spent on, because it was a torn up country before the Clintons went over there with the money, and it was torn up afterwards. So where was the progress?
Absolutely.
Tom, $32 billion. You could rebuild that entire country for $32 billion.
Absolutely. I mean, there are some countries that don't have that much gross domestic product, but you could not tell that there was $5 really put into rebuilding that country. And the other thing that's lost on folks sometimes, Jimmy, is that the U.S. is by far the largest trading partner
Yes.
for Haiti as well. And so when you consider the state of affairs there, what's going on with folks who are obviously in a state of trauma and crisis with their leader having been assassinated, nobody still has the answer to that. When you consider it being the U.S.'s largest economic partner, but look at the way the U.S. is dealing with the Haitians who are trying to seek, a place of peace and asylum after having been in several other countries, basically being exploited for their labor, and it's just in a state of crisis. But before we get too deep into this, Jim, we do have a special guest,
Yes.
Mr. Robert Edison, who we want to thank for joining us tonight. He is a historian. He has a deep, rich professional history. So, Brother Edison, why don't you join us? Give us the abbreviated version, of your background, and let's dig a little bit deeper into our story tonight.
Okay. Well, basically, I'm a retired educator with the Dallas Independent School District. I spent 44 years working with the DISD as a teacher of ethnic studies and history, and I retired as the director of social studies. And we're a district with 158,000 plus students, and so my task was to help develop curriculum, to train teachers, to build assessments. And I also worked in the museum field. So I've also served as a museum educator for the African American Museum, the Avery Research Center, College of Charleston, recently with the Bessie Smith Cultural Center in Chattanooga. So I consider myself both an educator and in the classroom, but also in the museum field.
Okay, Brother Roberts, now I want to throw a theory at you and get your opinion. See, I still think that the Haitians are being punished because if you look back through history, they were the catalyst to get the Europeans out of the slavery business. When they defeated the army of Napoleon, which was the best fighting force in the world at that time, that showed their determination that they were not going to be put back into slavery after fighting and winning their freedom. I don't think the world has ever forgiven them for that. I think they're still being punished today to some degree for their ability and their somewhat, I guess, maybe arrogance to stand up to white Europeans and decide they don't want to go back into slavery after fighting to free themselves out of slavery.
And that's so true. We have to keep in mind that never before in history had slaves overthrown their masters and then had the audacity to create their own independent nation. So Haiti was the first independent black nation in the Western Hemisphere. And the mere fact that, the revolt took place, and basically it started in 1791 with Toussaint L'Ouverture. And he led that revolt against the French, and he had help with the French soldiers not being able to adapt to some of the diseases that existed on Haiti. So a lot of those French soldiers they were sick, they were dying from disease, and then they met a guerrilla force of enslaved people who were determined to either die or be free.
Well, when you're given that choice, that's a strong motivator.
Yeah. Yeah, and so it struck fear in the United States.
It struck fear around the world.
Yeah.
A lot of Europeans looked at that, especially even the British. And they used, I believe I read, about 25% of their national wealth to basically buy slaves and free them to get out of the slavery business for the territories that they controlled. And other European countries kind of followed suit after that. So I give the Haitians credit for being a catalyst for the start and collapse of slavery in the Western Hemisphere.
Right. And you're right that, Haiti was punished because no country recognized this independent nation. No country would set up trading agreements with them. And that's why even today, Haiti is the poorest nation in the Western Hemisphere. At one time, most of the coffee that went out in the world came from Haiti. The wealth of Cuba, because once the revolution took place, a lot of the French people moved to Cuba and they moved to New Orleans. Now, Thomas Jefferson initially thought that the Haitian Revolution would be something positive because it basically removed the French again. So that's another European country that's out of the way of American expansion. But, America's immigration policy has always been anti-black, and even more so anti-people of color, starting with the Chinese Exclusion Act, even discriminating from Europeans from Southern and Eastern Europe because they were more darker complexion from those in Northern and Western Europe. Basically, we've never had a fair immigration policy when it comes to black people from Africa coming in this country. So when you look at the numbers and statistics, you can see that there's an anti-black bias. And, our former president, raised the issue when he talked about S-hole countries. Why are we having all these people coming from these countries? Why can't they come from Norway and Denmark? Well, all he's saying is that, we need to slow down the browning of America.
Well,
Absolutely.
that is
because
certainly I'm sorry. Go ahead.
You're right.
I was going to say that's certainly been obvious with the Haitians. If we can kind of come back to them, I mean, if the Coast Guard picked them up in a raft in the water, they are jetted back to Haiti, and we saw this down in South Texas. Now all of a sudden you can scrape up immigration judges when before you told us that you couldn't find any. Other Latinos get a sign and release as long as they promise to come back 3 to 5 years from now for the deportation hearing, and you let them into the interior of America. But with the Haitians, you have planes, judges, and processing at record levels to fly them back home. And it's almost unheard of that you could do this to this group of people, but you don't do this across the board. You don't do this to the Canadians who overstay their visas. You don't do this to the Asians who overstay their visas. And you certainly don't do this to the Latinos who somehow cross the border illegally and given a pass to come into the interior as long as they promise to come back in 3 to 5 years. But the Haitians, you can process them and get them processing back home in record numbers.
Yeah, and that's part of Reagan's policy. Reagan started a policy in 1981, and basically it was you search the Haitians, you detain them, and then you return them to Haiti. And this is what we see still going on. But that was government policy starting, well, really before that, back in 72 when you had the Haitian boat people coming into Florida.
Oh, yeah.
That's always been the policy.
Those boats get rescued and turned back around.
Yeah, Cubans are welcome.
The Cubans make it to the shore. They're instant citizens. They can just get here. Nobody's sending them back home. So, I mean,
let me ask you this, Jimmy, before you, because I wanted to also, just doing my research and putting more of a historical narrative as to the history with Haiti and the United States. And there's something else that doesn't lose me, and that is in my opinion, the debt that the U.S. should owe the Haitians, considering a pretty large, massive piece of land that they owe the Haitians that the French ended up selling them at some point in time. Can you give us a little bit more insight on this? Because this is something that loses a lot of people who may have fell asleep during history.
Yeah, and see, this goes back again to why Thomas Jefferson kind of welcomed the revolt in Haiti, because, the French lost a lot of soldiers, so they no longer could protect their territory in the United States, which is Louisiana, what we call now Louisiana Purchase. And they were so afraid that the British were going to come in and take it, or even the Americans at some point take it. So they decided we might well get something out of this, so let's sell it to them. And this is how the United States ended up with the Louisiana Purchase. And if it had not been for that revolt in Haiti, then Napoleon would have agreed, because basically he lost some money, in other words.
To give our users some scope, when we talk about the Louisiana Purchase, we're not just talking about what we know as the state of Louisiana, but what are we talking about, Doc, in terms of if we look at the states today?
It doubled the size of the United States. Yes. Just to show you how large it was, yes. I mean, it went all the way up to the Canadian border
and westward, and
all the way west when you talk about Oregon and Washington, and then you had the Southwest at that point that was part of Mexico. This is why I often say when we talk about immigration with Mexicans that, Mexicans didn't cross the border crossed them. They were here before Europeans.
Right. Because, when you look at this in historical context and you look at that period of time in our history, you have to remember, where the U.S. was at that time of the Haitian Revolution. The Haitian Revolution, we're looking at the U.S. as it is today. But when you consider what geographically the U.S.
The Mississippi River was that borderline. And you figure New Orleans, was still controlled by the French. So you think everything west of that Mississippi River stopping at what we call now the Mexican Cession or the Southwest, then that became part of the United States because of Napoleon's deal to sell that landmass.
Well, there's always been a strategy, it seems. If you look at the territories taken away from Mexico with a phony war, and the forcing, not really forcing, but putting some pressure on the Russians to, sell us Alaska. You took Hawaii. You paid nothing for that. You just came in and one day decided that, oh, this is America now. Threw out the royal family, which they're still fighting to get their country back. So, America has had some aggressive movements when it comes to expanding America out from East Coast to West Coast. They just seem like hell bent on making that happen.
Well, it's manifest destiny. They say that it's the will of God. But let's not leave out the Indian Removal Act, and taking all that land from Native Americans. All along the East Coast and the South. We know about the Trail of Tears and the number of Native Americans on that forced march from Tennessee and Alabama and Mississippi and Florida to lands in Oklahoma. So it's just another example of what I call this anti discrimination or this anti attitude toward people of color. So it's not anything new.
Well, I wouldn't even say anti-people of color. I would say anti-black or anti-African policy.
Well, especially intelligent Africans now. They still give Nigeria a harder time than they do Somalia, for example, or because those people are smart, educated, and they're industrial. So those are not the kind of black people they want coming to America, because you may corrupt the black folks we already have here and get them motivated to get more positive about education.
But Jimmy, doesn't the U.S. advocate that it wants a skilled group of immigrants coming into the country?
They want white skilled people. Yes. Do not want.
Skill does not have a color.
Yes, Tom, it does, because you know what? Some people are okay with the status quo, the way things are, and we know the schools are terrible. Many of the black schools, inner city schools, are terrible. We have half our young men, if you average them out around the nation, are dropping out of high school. A lot of black kids are graduating at 8th and 9th grade levels, reading and math levels. You have some school districts where there's not a student in the school district that can pass a standard math or English. And this is ridiculous the way things are. We we don't seem to have a government that seems to be motivated to fix the educational system that is crippling a lot of our kids, and too many of us are just happy with our kids getting a piece of paper that says they graduated, even though they haven't learned anything. And so, bringing in a bunch of educated, talented people, because you look around the world, Tom, a lot of the Caribbean blacks, especially the ones that land in New York from Dominican Republic, and up and down the Caribbean, a lot of those people are very smart and talented. When you look at black success, in those areas, a lot of that is coming from outside of America, not within America. Hey, we have someone who wants to join. Let's see what they have to say, Tom.
I fell off there for a second.
Oh, that's you coming back here.
Yeah, I fell off there for a second, so sorry about that.
So you guys give your opinion on whether it is a ban on or making it harder for blacks to come into the country, or educated, talented blacks to come into the country that may disrupt the status quo.
It's I think it's a combination of both. You mentioned Nigerians have an entrepreneurial spirit, as part of their culture. Also, being an educator, and having Nigerian students, they have a strong sense of family. And I would talk to my Nigerian students. They tell me, "No, we don't have cell phones. We don't go out to parties on weekend." In other words, it's taking advantage of opportunities that are available, and I think this is a big distinction that I see in African students and families who come here, is that they want that next generation to excel above where they are. And that was the spirit among African Americans during most of our history. Only recently has, that we have a generation of African American young people who don't aspire to, excel as high as their parents.
So let me put a pin in that right quick and ask you a question as an educator. I won't even say former educators. I think you're always an educator.
Teaching,
you're
yes.
always learning. My question is this: you made a very poignant statement about, let's say, first, second generation Africans who come to America. They are very focused. They understand why they are here. They understand what they're here. And, for the majority of our time here, I think that most of our ancestors, even during the period of slavery, understood that they had an agenda, one for survival, one to be able to control their destiny. But here recently, there seems to be some of that message that is lost. And with you having been around young people for a very long period of time, where do you believe that message began to get lost? And for the audience out there, we are going to go back to our primary focus for this show, which is the Haitian, what I'll call it the Haitian crisis, because they're going through several crises. But this is a very important topic that I think that you as an educator have a very distinct opinion on. Where did our young people begin to lose the focus, and why?
Well, I think part of it is that for the first time, I think we have a generation of unchurched black folk, and still the most significant institution in the black community, the wealthiest institution in the black community. The leadership pool of the black community has historically come out of, African American churches' religious experience. And that's not the church doesn't have the influence that it used to have.
Correct.
And then when you go back to the family not only provided you, place to eat and sleep, but it provided you with coping skills. And I'm sure you gentlemen heard that you got to be twice as good.
Yes.
You got to take advantage of opportunities that are out there. What you do at home, out in the world, reflects on your family, and you were conscious of that.
Yes, you didn't want to embarrass your family.
Right, and I think that all of that, the sense of everyone being responsible for everyone else. It's that saying, I am because you are, and
Right.
you are because I am.
I would agree, and I definitely appreciate your feedback on that. I know Jimmy and I have had a conversation for several times. First, Jimmy, when I fell off and came back on, I lost the link that gets us into the chat box. So please monitor that to see if anybody has any thoughts, any questions. And also, since we are about 25 minutes in, for anyone who does decide they 972-497-2280. For those who would like to call in, please call us at 972-497-2280. If you have any questions, any thoughts, any questions that you would like to present to Dr. Edison today, let's kind of go back to our conversation on what's going on with the Haitian immigrants who are seeking asylum in the U.S., who are trying to basically find a safe haven, especially considering the catastrophe that Haiti has had just here recently, or if we look at the last generation. What do Black folk, African Americans, first generation immigrants from other African countries, Caribbeans, should they care? Why should they care? What's at stake?
We should care, Tom, because those are our
Well,
brothers and sisters.
wait. I understand that, but I'm asking Dr. Edison from a political perspective. And this isn't like I don't understand the question. I'm asking for your opinion as to why should other Black folks care and what is at stake?
I think first we have to, again, take from a historical perspective, because you had thousands of African Americans that went to Haiti once they became an independent nation. And that's often overlooked in the history books. But they didn't stay in Haiti. And the reason they didn't stay in Haiti, number one, the culture was so different from what they had experienced, you know, in the southern part of the United States. The language,
Hmm.
speaking French. Haiti, predominantly Catholic nation, and African Americans they didn't have a lot of trust in the Catholic Church because it's one of the largest slave owning institutions. And so even in modern times, I think African Americans never really built a bond with Haitians like we have with other groups because of those same, three aspects, especially the language aspect and the religion aspect of it. But should we have a concern? Yes. And, they're part of the human family, number one. And we share a common history and a common heritage.
Well, I think it speaks volumes, Brother Roberts. If we don't take up for our brothers and sisters, then that shows how much we care and respect that we have for ourselves.
And
And Tom,
go
while
ahead.
we get a chance, let's probably segue into some other areas of government where blacks are
Well,
not treated fairly.
well, well, why don't we do this before we end this conversation?
No, not
I
ending,
think there
just
are
tied in with some
not
other policies.
okay. So one other question I would ask, and I'm going to keep the floor open as to who would want to respond to this. Given where we are right now, so Biden has finally been literally forced to make a statement about what's going on with the Haitians who are trying to seek asylum in the United States of America. Obviously, depending on who you're talking to, the way they've been treated has been abjectly inhumane and unfair to some people. What should and could everyday people who either look like those Haitians or who care for what their welfare, what can they do? What should they be doing? I know that there are folks out there who are sending supplies and things of that nature to help support, groups that are trying to provide a humanitarian statement towards folks who are being treated unfairly and who basically have been moved from one state to another, literally trying to find work and a piece of life. But what can people do today to help influence policy, and what can folks do to help Haitians directly, considering where they are right now?
Yeah. Well, I think we have a parallel model with the Afghans that they're bringing here. Cities are welcoming them. Organizations, agencies are helping them find
Right.
housing. They're providing funds until they're able to get
Get
jobs. They're helping them with the language barrier because, again, with the Haitians, you're going to have this language barrier that they're going to have to overcome. Uh, but just putting forth a welcome mat, and we have enough institutions in our community that can do that. But we're silent. You don't hear the black community speaking up on behalf of Asians and sending out that welcome mat. It's almost like we don't want them here.
Gotcha.
well,
And I
Brother
think that there are
Roberts.
some.
Oh, go
Go
ahead,
ahead,
Tom.
Jimmy.
No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say. I mean, it took. I think it took too long for what you would call the traditional black civil rights groups or other groups that have a tendency to focus on the domestic affairs to understand the implications of what was going on right at our border, even though they may not be particularly in Texas per se. But I was thinking, I mean, this has been going on for a while. We knew it was coming, and so the question was, why did it take so long for maybe the NAACPs of the world or the other groups that have been focused on civil rights historically, but at the end of the day, I'm always going back to Malcolm. He says, I mean, there is very little difference between what's going on in Birmingham, Alabama, and what was going on in Accra, Ghana back in the 50s and 60s before, of course, most of the African countries gained their independence. And so our state of affairs and condition in the United States is not materially different, except to a certain scale, than other Africans in Africa. When you look at the colonial powers that still control most of their economy in Haiti, or in some of the other European countries that have a large group of black folks, to some degree or another.
Well, Tom,
And
that presupposes that
mhm.
these black organizations have some self-control over what they're doing. They don't. I mean, let's be realistic. These black organizations answer to a white liberal Jewish slave master that tells them what's okay, what you should be upset about, and what you're going to protest against. Why? Because that's where the money comes from that feeds these organizations. So you're not going to cut off those who provide you your funds to live. You're not going to bite the hand that feeds you. So until their white leaders tell them that you can be upset about this, for the most part, the black organizations are not going to be bothered.
And sadly, that has been the case, and it's almost like history repeating itself, because when you had the Haitians, back in the 1980s, 1991, what they did was said Haitians are bringing AIDS and tuberculosis. Now you hear the argument, okay, the Haitians are bringing in, more of the virus and that aspect. And, we get our news from the white dominated media. Many of our viewpoints are dominated by that. And so we do not have a clear strategy as how we can help our people, whether they're from Haiti or from other parts of Central and South America, and even Mexico, because African people are all over the
Yes,
Yes, they are.
continent.
and that is
And often we don't think about that.
That is true.
Most
That is
people have no idea that there is a significant population of black folks in Mexico.
That's
Yes.
right.
Who are catching hell also.
That's right. By the
believe it or not,
government.
By the government. Very color conscious down there in Mexico.
Yeah.
And up and down the Caribbean, not Caribbean, but Central America and South America.
That's right.
I was surprised to learn how, I've been to Brazil a couple of times and always had a good time, but didn't realize just how color conscious they are down there against dark skinned people. But anyway, we're going to get back to immigration and how fast the government mobilized judges, processing centers, planes, and money to get these people out of the country. Never seemed, at least I never by me. And I'm okay. I'm a strong immigration person. Enforce the law across the board is all I say. If you can do this for the Haitian, you can do it across the board for everyone. And if you're not going to do it for everyone, if you're going to have very lax immigration policies, then don't strong arm the Haitians. Be lax across the board in your application of the law, because I'm a firm believer that the law is supposed to be applied equally, either harshly or loosely. You decide.
If I could advise folk in Haiti, the government leaders, I would tell them, declare your nation a communist nation. And the United States would allow all your refugees to come in to flee communism, because we're still operating on that, just like they do for the Cubans. The Cubans come in because what are they fleeing? They're not fleeing poverty, and in reality they are, but that's not what they use. And then the other thing is the images that come out of Haiti and come out of rarely do we see urban images of the buildings and the paved streets coming out of. And so Americans have been taught to believe that there's nothing in Africa or Haiti worth saving.
And that's because obviously the mass media, which is run by a wealthy few, wants to project that image, while at the same time they're sending money and resources over there in order to extract the wealth, in order to extract the value out of the same place that they want to show everyone else is backwards and poor and full of disease and infest.
That's right.
Well, Thomas,
And
obviously the health and the disease issue, we hadn't been testing illegal immigrants coming into the country. But we do know tuberculosis is on the rise, and we pretty much had almost eradicated the disease in this country, and that's probably from illegal immigration, no matter where it's coming from. But we can't pinpoint and say the Haitians are bringing diseases in, because one, you hadn't tested the Haitians, but you're not testing anybody. So if you want to say illegal immigration across the board is a problem for health, then be fair in your application. But once again, trying to pinpoint this on the Haitians is a fear factor. You're not trying to influence us to be afraid of the Haitian people when they're just trying to come here for a better life like everyone else. I mean, let's be realistic about it. And we should be trying to do. This is what I say. The fault I have with the Latino population versus Asian. I believe on record, illegal immigrants from Asian descent still outweigh illegal immigration by Latino descent. But we don't have a problem with the Asians. Why? Because they employ their people. They mess up the grading curve in the schools, which Brother Roberts can attest to. They graduate top of their classes. They really mess things up with the grading curve when they're around. And they employ their people. They don't make any noise. They do everything they can to assimilate into our society, versus people who want to force their language on you and really are not trying hard enough to assimilate. So I think if there was more of an effort to assimilate, immigration really wouldn't be a big problem here in America. We wouldn't have these policies sometimes that are stringent and administrations that are sometimes loose and some that are hard on immigration if everyone was just trying to fit into our scheme and get along and not cause problems. But until that's been demonstrated, we need to stop allowing others to scare us against the Haitians. But Tom, while we're almost running out of time, I want to address some other policies by the government to see if this forms a pattern. And the two, or the other policies, is what's going on with black farmers versus white farmers in the USDA not getting paid, and the reparation bill. Tom, I have family members who voted for the current administration thinking they were going to get paid. I believe either in our investment club or book club we talked about this. Some people were excited thinking that Biden, Harris were going to, get reparations passed. It doesn't seem like the current administration can find a pen or find the words to even endorse the bill that's out there.
Well, Jimmy, I would say
is it all tied together into one big umbrella, or are these isolated incidents?
Jimmy, if within the last year they could not pass the George Floyd Act, what makes you think they're going to come anywhere close to passing a reparations bill? Given everything that has happened within the last year, they couldn't even get a George Floyd bill passed. And so
John Lewis voting
I don't want to say is out of the question, but I don't see it.
Okay,
but Dr. Edison, give us your insight.
Have we been bamboozled?
There you go. Give us your insight on this from a historical perspective.
Well, let's take it from black farmers first.
Well, you know what? There's still a couple years left.
Yeah, and black farmers.
Yeah, we don't make a distinction between equality and equity. If you go back and look at legislation, most federal legislation is the funds and the operation of those programs are turned over to the states. And what has happened historically is that southern states have discriminated against African Americans. So when you're talking about the farm bills historically and loans, that money was turned, the states had to operate it. And in the South, they just did not give loans to African Americans. A lot of people talk about, Social Security was great, it set up equality. But if you look at it, two groups were left out. One were domestics, who made up the majority of domestics in the 30s, African Americans, people of color. And the other aspect of it was farm workers.
We may have a caller here, Jimmy. So let me see what we got. Black Men Speak, welcome. If you could identify yourself and where you're from. Hello, Charles. How are you, sir?
Brother Charles, long time no hear.
How you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. Jimmy, it looks like we have one of our former special guests, Charles, who has joined us tonight and wants to ask a question or make a statement. So
let me see how to cut your feedback down.
all right, good deal. Let me turn this down a little bit. So Charles, you have a specific question or statement you'd like to make? And first, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Yeah.
Well, one, I certainly enjoyed it. It's good to see Dr. Robert Edison there.
Yeah,
It's been a
my
while.
good friend Charles. How you doing?
I just couldn't help but jumping in just at that point. I think we talked about immigration policy. We talked about the policy vis-a-vis Haitian. Talked about, and from the top, the question was about the racist foundation of most U.S. government policy.
Yes.
And that's really the blanket, and that covers how they respond to black farmers. It covers how they respond to Haitian immigrants. It was not designed to benefit black people.
That's right.
So we find ourselves having conversations like this as if we're mystified or befuddled about how the government policies work. Dr. Edison just mentioned the handing off of federal agricultural policy to the states because they are sure of what the states will do with it.
That's right.
Right? They're not going to use it for the benefit of black farmers. And so they feel comfortable offshoring that responsibility. Clearly, the southern states are masterful at ensuring minimal benefit of taxpayer return on investment for black folks. And so I think it's a great topic, but I think it applies to all the conversations that you and Tom and I have had, Jimmy, about the economy and all other affected issues that rely on public policy to determine its impact. I want to go back to one thing, and then I will be finished. But like I said, I really have enjoyed the show tonight. But it was brought up. I think Dr. Edison said, much of our thinking. And so Tom asked a question about the response from, I'll say, American black people to the Haitian issue. And so many of us are absolutely held sway by the propaganda machine.
Right.
So our own opinions about how we should respond to Haitian immigration is colored by this propaganda that we get. Well, we don't know that we're supposed to love Haitians because they're black like us.
Right.
We treat them as if they're foreign people.
Right.
And it can be, yes, as identified by language and cultural aspects, but the facts are that they're no different from us.
That's
except
true.
for they live on an island and we're on this island in the U.S. And so I think communications and vehicles like you've established, Black Men Speak, clearly, my background in the black press.
Yep.
I absolutely believe that that's one of the remaining clear channels of communication available to us, and some kind of way we have to get some unanimity of thought around issues that impact us. It won't be reparations because we got Thomas Sowell telling us the reason we've already had our reparations. Crazy stuff. When we can look out any window that we're in America and see disparate impacts from policy that are detrimental to black folk and beneficial to other folk, and we all make the same taxpayer investment. So again, I applaud all of you for what you do on a regular basis, Tom and Jimmy and Dr. Edison. Always good to hear you and see you. Glad to see you out here still kicking out my bearded bread and yours.
Well, you're one of my heroes.
Yes. Mine too.
And thank you very much for calling in, Charles.
Charles is one of the smartest brothers I know, man. He is.
Yeah.
All right.
I've known Charles for a little bit. I think he's still chairman of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. He's done great work in the state of Texas. We do talk from time to time. He keeps me informed on what's going on here in the state, especially with our legislator and some of the policies there, which it seems like we're losing ground. Because every time I talk to him, it never the report that never gets better. It always seems like it's getting worse. But yeah, Charles is a very good brother. We've had him on the show a number of times. It's always a pleasure to talk to him. So Brother Roberts, I think Charles points out a point that I was trying to make, is that
Yeah.
this is a blanket problem. This is not just some isolated incidents and some pillars here and there. This is our government across the board, and the response has to be that we can't sit and wait anymore. We have to get up and start doing and taking care of ourselves, taking care of our own problems, and speaking out when we witness, like we see down here at the border, inequities and unfairness.
Right.
Demand that our government either execute the law equally, like you do for everyone else, or if you're going to be lax and not execute it, don't just single out black folks to be heavy-handed with. I mean,
Yeah.
this response from the government down there for Del Rio, I mean, it's been amazing because you've been crying that you can't find judges, you can't find planes, you can't find border agents, and you found all of them as soon as you found out some black folks were crossing the border.
Yeah, I would encourage everyone to read the book "The Color of Law," and I've
Okay.
forgotten the author's first name, but Rosenstein, I believe, is his last name. And what he does is trace the history of racism in American law, and he brings it all the way up, to mass incarceration. But I can give you two other examples. One is the GI Bill. We're taught that it gave all these opportunities. The SGI again is run by the state. Black GIs couldn't get loans for housing in the suburbs, so that impacted them today. They couldn't pass on generational wealth. They couldn't go to college, get college degrees because schools were segregated. So, we teach things as if equality existed, and when you really look into it, it was not fair. Interstate highway system. They've done more to destroy black communities because, again, the federal government gives the money. The cities and states determine where those highways go.
Rolling right
So
through your
in Tulsa,
neighborhood.
it went through the black community, the
Yes.
business community.
Yes.
In Dallas, it went through the black. In Atlanta, it went through the black community, and it's all by design.
One other thing, Brother Roberts, you mentioned Social Security. Um, I've, I've, I've always, my opinion has always been that since black men don't live long enough to collect Social Security, we should be able to take our money and privatize it. For those who want to privatize some portion of Social Security, you should start with black men who don't live long enough to collect it. On the most part. So we're playing into the fund for basically white women who collect the most out of Social Security.
Yeah,
Yeah, but the thing about it is you bring up a very good point, Jimmy. But I mean, I think obviously that's by design because ultimately they don't want to have to give up the money in the first place. I mean, just like insurance companies, they're not in the business of paying out claims; they're in the business of making money. So they want to minimize the amount of claims that they pay out. The same with Social Security.
Well, I'm just pointing out, Tom, there are some times that we have to fight. I know that we're told that we shouldn't adopt certain conservative principles and values, but this is one that would benefit us. Because if you're able to invest your, I don't know what it is, 2, 3%, 4%, plus your employer's 3, 4% that they match, and invest that in some fund, that's money and wealth that you can build, you can borrow against, and you can pass on to future generations when you
that's right.
pass on. If I die before 62 and a half or 65, I get nothing. And all the
You're
money
right.
collected from me doing my 65-year or before that death is just
Goes
turned over
back
to
to
the
the government.
government.
Absolutely, Jimmy. But I think the prevailing wisdom states that if you give this money to individual workers, that they'll end up blowing the money and they won't have anything, and then they'll be coming back to the government with their hands out anyway. That's the
Tom, you put
prevailing wisdom.
you put some strict conditions on it, which is you can't
Mhm.
pull the money out, so it's not so private that it's yours. And it goes into the same types of investments, safe investments that Congress has. So give black men a chance to put our Social Security money into the same investment scheme that's good enough for our congressional leaders when they retire and decide to get out of stop working. So, but money you could borrow against maybe for a house or education, but money that still is collecting and it being invested, and that when you retire, it will be there for you in your retirement.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
Yeah.
So with the 10 minutes that we have left, let's kind of wrap up our conversation. And as always, Jimmy, kind of make sure that we're talking to our listeners about action items, what they can do, how they can wield their influence either as an individual voter and stakeholder, or how they can lean on the institutions and organizations that they are involved with to influence change and policy that is in all of our best interests. Because at the end of the day, when you look at, and I think you brought up a very poignant argument here, Jimmy, is that when you look at what's happening to those folks who are trying to get into the U.S., quite frankly, there is a very straight line and parallel to how the government treats other folk who look like them, but who happen to be American citizens as well. So, the U.S. policy and outcome on that policy as it pertains to them isn't that different as it pertains to U.S. citizens who also happen to be black as well.
Well, that's true, Tom, and Dr. Roberts. But Tom, I'm not trying to lean on any organization at this point. The current many of our black organizations are white run and funded. They take their marching orders from the people who give them their money. We can't depend on government. If we don't come together as a people and start doing for ourselves and change our mindset, that where we can't trust each other and work together, and Tom, we need to have a renaissance period where we basically come together and change our culture, our thinking, and our voice. We need to have a united voice that we can speak up that we're not happy about what's happening down south of the border. We're not happy with what's happening with our farmers. We're not happy with even the way our state fund small businesses and give out contracts, which our brother Charles can talk to. Hell, I'm not even happy the way we run our school systems in the inner city, which brother Roberts can talk to. So we can't continue to just sit back and wait for someone. We have to be the someone in the catalyst to make it happen. And we're just not motivated to do that, Tom, because we're told that we're not supposed to do this.
I would say this. I don't disagree with you in principle, but the question is this: individually, we all have a voice, but collectively, obviously, we have a more powerful voice. Whether this message is driven through traditional institutions or creating new ones, which always happen, ultimately, you have more power as a fist than you do as a finger. So the question would be, what is the message that we should be sending? How do we leverage our collective power as individuals or as institutions in order to change policy at the federal level, at the state level, and at the local level to ensure that there is fairness and equity for all folks, not just the folks who look like those who are running the government who don't look like us?
You want to talk about Brother Roberts?
I think going back to what Malcolm X said, he said human rights come before civil rights. And I think we as a people have not fought enough for our own humanity. And when we look at that with police brutality, black on black crime, which, white on white crime, because most people kill people of the same race, but you only hear black on black crime. But we need to go back and regroup. Churches didn't collect money to build bigger churches. They initially collected money to benefit the community and the people who made up that, that brotherhood. And we just have not taken our resources to good use to benefit us as a people, to support institute. Everybody knows our kids suffered last year due to when school shut down. Every church black church in the community ought to have Saturday school going on. They need to open those buildings. Need to provide access to, they have teachers and educated folk. They need to put them to use. But I think that we have to do what we did in the old days. And that's where we came together and we defined these are our goals. And our primary goal is to make sure that our children have a better life in the future. And I don't see us,
That's not happening, Doc.
we enjoying the here and now. Let the children take care of themselves.
And one more question, Doc. I want to follow up on what you just said. And you mentioned the Black Wall Street in Oklahoma and their mindset. When I read their history, it makes me so excited and happy that those people just did.
That's right.
If you didn't provide banking for them, they opened their own banks. If you didn't want to provide medical service, they started their own medical school, provide their own doctors and nurses. Whatever white folks didn't do for them, you want to stop buses? Okay, we start our own bus service. They had a mindset of doing for themselves. Doc, how can we get to that mindset? That this is not a federal problem, not an institutional problem. This is us not doing for ourselves problem.
Yeah, well, that's who's teaching our kids. Look at the makeup of the teaching force in America. Majority of the kids are minority, but yet majority of teachers are still white females. And if we don't do some teaching at home and outside of the schools, our students are not going to come up with a roadmap for their own success and survival. And that's what they need. They need to have that roadmap that tells them, self-management of your own learning.
Right.
You have a responsibility to take in all you can. If they don't give you a homework assignment, create your own homework assignment. When they give you a sorry reading list, get your own reading list. And they got to manage their own learning. Impulse. They got to manage their impulse. A lot of our kids die every weekend because somebody couldn't manage their impulse.
True.
They get insulted and they take another brother or sister's life. So, we just have to go back to taking responsibility for teaching our own kids instead of, as my brother Jimmy would probably say, putting our kids in the hands of other folks.
That's right. We need to be teaching our kids ourselves and own that. You can't defer to the school system to teach your kids. That's your responsibility.
That I would agree with Jimmy, and I guess we've had this conversation before on prior shows. But the question is this: if you don't control your own institutions, you don't control your destiny. Right. And so now we have to have the conversation. It's not it's not a complex conversation. What does it take collectively? What else does the U.S. government, what else do other forces that don't have our best interests in mind have to do for us to understand that we have to withdraw our support for institutions that are not supporting us and build our own? I would agree that it might be very difficult, for every parent, the entire Black community to completely divorce itself from independent school districts across the country that are not run and controlled responsibly by folks who have their best interests in mind. But they can build a library at home. They can supplement what they are getting in their traditional school districts so that they understand their history from their perspective, not their history from someone else's perspective. Holding their churches and their church leaders accountable, because quite frankly, some of them are controlled by politicians and big business who may provide them money. And so it's not just your traditional civil rights organizations, but some of your churches are controlled by folks who may not have your best interests in mind. And then, of course, obviously, the Black family, being able to rebuild and restore that, because on the most part, our family is hanging together by a fingernail, because quite frankly, unlike when we were growing up, unlike when Brother Edison was growing up, you don't have a father in most of our households with their children, with their wife or with the mother of their children being able to build that foundation. So, as we've talked about before, we've got to turn the TV off. It's not controlled by us. Most of mass media is not controlled by us. And you got to read your own history from your own historians so that you can get the story right and understand where you need to go. And given that we have a historian on the line with us today, he understands that you don't know where to go if you don't understand your history, and especially your history from your perspective.
Or knowing what your potential is. And that you can draw on that, the success of your ancestors who had a much tougher environment. And let me say this, because I know we're running out of time. One, yes. Brother Roberts, thank you so much for being on the show. Okay. In November, the first week in November, I believe, if I look at the calendar correctly, we have a show on education. and I am hoping that we can talk you to come back
Sure.
to talk about
Happy to.
education,
Right.
because you've been on the inside, where we're just on the outside looking in, but you've been on the inside, so you can talk to some things. The other thing is that our show, this little show here, our platform, um, we get complaint after complaint from someone, whoever you are, you know who you are. It's not from our family here, um, but it's okay though because you're not going to shut us down. We continue to post our shows through YouTube, although we're being challenged on our facts that we present, on the messaging, on our content. I mean, they think of all kind of reasons not to post our video after the show ends, which we have to appeal to YouTube to get our shows publicly available,
Reinstated. Right.
reinstated. So this is an example. Even a show as small as ours that's growing, there are people out there who do not want black people to be exposed to anything positive or uplifting. This is all we do here. We're not entertaining anyone. We're not telling any jokes. We're not playing any music. We're not talking about celebrities here. We're bringing on people to help change the mindset of our folks so we can lift up out of this hole that we're in. How in the world anyone has a problem with this show is beyond me, but they do. But we're going to continue to fight. And this may be, Tom, the only serious show on social media where you can come get some real information and advice on how to fix your problem.
Absolutely, Jimmy. It is right at the top of the hour. So, Dr. Edison, Brother Edison, if you could just give us a closing statement that will kind of wrap up this conversation, yes, Jimmy, and then we will shut it down for this evening.
Yeah. We just have to, as a people, recognize that when it comes to treating African Americans with equity and equality,
Right.
that in America, that has been made an injustice in itself. So when you think about white people talking about reverse discrimination, and we have to guard against that in every aspect of trying to move African Americans forward. There's always going to be those who are going to say, if you help them, then that's an injustice in itself. And they don't want to acknowledge the fact that, the only people who got reparations after slavery were the slave owners. They got $300 for each slave they freed. And they don't put that in the history book.
Wow. Now that's I wasn't aware of that.
Okay.
And the federal government gave it to them.
Wow. That is the importance of understanding your history and understanding the history of this country or really globally, because we're looking at in the United States of America, what is it, maybe 500 some odd years of history. But as you can appreciate, when we talk about our people, our culture, our narrative, what we have built, we're talking about tens of thousands of years of history. And that's the conversation that we're not having.
Right.
And support the black press. I mean, that was our voice. And, because we don't support it, they have to rely on advertisement. So when you get the black newspaper now, it's got more advertisement than news. And Charles knows, man, the press was what got the word out to the community about what's going on, what strategies we can use, who's who in the community who's doing something so you can work with them. And we need to support the black press.
Which includes Black Men Speak. I mean, we are officially a news information show, so support us, people. Bring somebody back next week, and we're going to continue to do what we do, which means time is at the top of the hour, a little bit past, and it is your time to close us out with a prayer.
All right, we
can
reverently bow our heads. Dear Lord and gracious Father, we come before you again, thanking you for bringing us together. Father, we thank you for sending information through us that may help someone, that may edify someone, that may inspire someone in some way that is good and rightful in your eyes, Father. We thank you for breathing life into us today. We thank you for lifting up. Father, we thank you for bringing the brother Robert Edison to share his insight and his information with us today, that he has also said something that may have enlightened and influenced someone to make a better decision today, to help their families tomorrow, to help us as a country and as a group of people as we move forward, Father. We ask that you would continue to bless us in the Spirit, Father, for which we exist. And in your precious name we pray. Amen.
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 All right.
Again, thank you, brothers.